America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker with the Job Creators Network. And joining us today is Nicole Huyer from the Heritage Foundation, where she focuses on public policy and the economic impact government decisions can have on workers, entrepreneurs, and businesses. She spends a lot of time examining how policy proposals affect markets, affordability, and the people who keep local economies running. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I've been following your writings. Particularly, I think you've probably been very busy with Mamdani being elected mayor in New York, and looking at some of the proposals that he is working on in New York. Very different policies, particularly because it's the financial capital of the world, and to see it be run and the policies that are that he wants to implement in that city is a little depressing. But tell our viewers, if you're living in Florida like I am, the free state of Florida, or some other state, why should you be concerned about what's happening in New York with some guy who says he's a democratic socialist?
Absolutely. His proposals in New York City, they don't only affect New York City, but they affect everywhere across the country. It's also the ideology, this socialist idea that you can, tax people, you can implement government grocery stores, rent control, all of these policies that have been shown to fail in practice. It's a scary thing seeing that on American soil, because we've seen instances in Cuba, Venezuela, the Soviet Union, but it's a little scary seeing that now in America. But some of his specific policies have implications for other states, specifically his dedication to taxing the rich, which is definitely impacting states like Florida or states like Texas, North Carolina. We're seeing a lot of net migration out of New York and into those red states. So what happens in New York City not only impacts New Yorkers, but it has a broader impact on other states as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when you look at just the philosophy that he is following, the ideology that he's following, it's communism. I mean, this isn't just, I'm not just spewing rhetoric here. It is communism. And there seems to be an appetite for it in various sectors of the country. I mean, you're seeing it happen in Seattle with the mayor there, who, I just read, and I know we're focused on Mamdani, but I just read Starbucks, that's the birthplace of Starbucks in Seattle. They're leaving. I mean, to me, that'd be like Disney World leaving Orlando. It just doesn't happen. It's crazy. And it's because of the mayor's policies that is driving businesses out of Seattle. And you see Mamdani doing the same thing in New York. And yet they still have this layer of support there of people who believe that's the right thing to do. And it's like a cancer. It is spreading. And so the concern is, how far will it spread and how do we stop it?
Absolutely. In terms of how far it can spread, it definitely is disheartening to see places like Seattle or places like New York City now with socialist or even communist leaders implementing or voicing support for a lot of policies that would do a lot of harm to their specific municipalities or the states overall. I mean, some of them, the tax increases, things like rent control, all of these policies that have been shown to fail Yet they want to implement them thinking that they will be different this time around, as if it hasn't been tried before. So it definitely is discouraging to see. But moving forward, I think if we can, in a sense, see these policies in action, and sometimes people need to see them implemented and see how they fail to really understand the detrimental economic and social impacts that these will have on people in their lives.
Yeah, I read that Mandami said he was left with a gaping hole in terms of his budget. And then I saw Mayor Adams, former Mayor Adams, posted, so, not true, and lie detector, that he left him with a surplus. I mean, do you know what the truth is? Usually the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but, what's happening there in terms of the budget? Because here's what I read from you, which I found like staggering since I live in Florida. 8.5 million people in New York City, $127 billion budget, 23.3 million people in the entire state of Florida, $117 billion budget. That's insane. I mean, that's insane. Yeah. That's not even sustainable.
Yeah, the per capita spending in New York City is absolutely astronomical. Like you mentioned, it is a $127 billion budget for about 8.5 residents, compared to the entire state of Florida with a $117 billion budget for about 23.5 million residents. So per capita spending is very, very high, and what they're spending on is absolutely the problem. Mayor Mamdani cited a $7 billion deficit over the next 2 years for his budget, and he had to get that under control and pass a balanced budget. And he really did so by getting a bailout from the state governor, Kathy Hochul. So the problem in New York City isn't revenue. It's not the amount of money that's obviously in the budget, because comparatively to states like Florida, the spending per capita is just so high in New York. The problem is what you're spending on. These misguided policy priorities, things like DEI, ESG, the mayor's new public programs, the government grocery stores, all of his other socialist policies and programs that he wants to implement. So the problem is spending. And by cutting spending, you can absolutely reduce that massive $127 billion budget to a more sustainable model like Florida has.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that there's that much spending going on. And I can assure you the standard of living in Florida is pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here. Obviously, the weather's great. We don't have a state income tax. The education here is fantastic. We have a universal education. So if you don't like the school your child is attending, you can take your tax dollars and spend them at a better school. So there's just a lot of good things here. It's not perfect. I got a list of complaints I could talk to you about on another podcast, but overall, I think it's pretty good here in terms especially when I saw that budget, it was eye popping for me, of course. The taxes that he wants to pass, how is he able to pass taxes? And this is a little bit of me just not understanding how New York City politics works. I thought Governor Hochul had to actually pass taxes for him to increase his revenues. Is he able to actually do it within the city himself?
Well, you're absolutely correct. It is up to the state and the state legislature and Governor Kathy Hochul to pass things like the corporate tax increase or the 2% income tax that Mamdani wants to implement. He doesn't have unilateral control or authority to pass those things. So lucky for New Yorkers right now. But he did float the idea of balancing the budget on the backs of the working people by implementing a 9.5% property tax increase across all classes, which would have been residential, commercial. So not just impacting high earners, but impacting the middle class as well. So while the corporate tax increase and the income tax increase are subject to the state legislature, there are other tools at the city's disposal to potentially increase something like the property tax. But he luckily didn't do that to balance the budget here in May. But that is something that he does have in his toolkit if he decides to use that later on.
And he's floated a 2% millionaire tax. What's the status on that? What's been the appetite for that from the state legislature and Governor Hochul?
Right now, Governor Kathy Hochul and the state aren't backing Mamdani's 2% millionaire tax proposal, thankfully. It's not to say that it won't eventually happen, but he has been very much pressuring the governor and the state to pass that because he is definitely on his tax the rich kick, whether that's millionaires or high earning corporations. But at least right now, the state realizes you can't alienate your entire tax base that contributes significant tax revenue to the government's purse, essentially, to finance all of these public programs that Mamdani has been campaigning on. By taxing high-earning corporations and high-earning individuals, you would definitely drive out your tax base, as we've already started to see in New York City, as well as other blue states like California that are trying to implement similar tax increases. We're seeing migration out of those states into low tax, low regulatory burdens, red states like Florida or states like Texas.
Yeah. Recently, famously, we saw Mamdani on a video that he posted tapping on the lens of his camera outside of Ken Griffin's multi-million-dollar condo, bragging about I guess it's a millionaire's tax on the property. I think it's over 5 million. Property's over 5 million, if I got that right. Is that passing? And what were your thoughts on the backlash that we saw from him doing that right outside this gentleman's home?
So that tax is like you said, the $5 million asset limit on individuals' second properties. But that video was extremely discouraging to see, and it did get a lot of backlash, which I think is a good thing, of realizing that if you're alienating your tax base, just taxing them more money isn't going to be able to, it's not going to work. Simply, we see migration out of the state. I think Mamdani is assuming a static tax base, assuming that if you tax individuals and corporations more and more, they're just going to stay in the state and just bear the burden of that tax increase. But that's obviously not the case, because when individuals and companies decide to leave because the taxes and regulations are so burdensome, they have no incentive to stay in the city, and then that drains the city's revenue source. So definitely that video was honestly quite disgusting to see, completely alienating a class of people that contribute so much to not only general economic activity, but in terms of producing goods and services, they contribute to the labor market because their businesses employ millions of New Yorkers. So I think Mamdani is definitely, we've started to see a small backtrack with his recent meetings with JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon and Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon, talking with them about the best course moving forward for the city and how the city and businesses can sort of partner. Because I think because of that video, he received a lot of backlash, and he's sort of now trying to backtrack.
Yeah, I don't see Ken Griffin speak out a lot on politics. Obviously, on economics, you see him all over the circuit. But on this one, he said something, and it was more about the safety aspect. I mean, it really felt like he had been put in danger unnecessarily, and because we've seen such violence occur in the last recent years, it was not just discouraging to me, it was frightening to see that a politician would highlight one resident who already pays property taxes. I mean, the implication here is that Ken Griffin is not paying property taxes now, so we need to get him and get him to pay more. And the reality is, this guy pays a ton of taxes to the city, and if he's not there very often, then he's not even utilizing the services that he's paying into for everybody else to use. I of course, never want to. I'm not here to defend billionaires; they don't need my defense. But it's just a ridiculous point of view to put out there. But it's scarier to me that. And it's a little bit fun to make fun of it because it's just so ridiculous too. But it's scarier to me what the broader implications are here, and just watching the support, from the Bernie Sanders supporters to AOC. A few years ago when she first came into office, we watched her run 25,000 jobs out of New York City. In her, she was celebrating running Amazon out of New York City because she didn't understand what a $3 billion tax credit was for them to bring these jobs in. And these were like 6-figure salaries. And she runs 25,000 jobs out of the city and then cheers about it. I mean, that's just crazy to me. And yet she continues to get elected every election. So it's crazy to me that her policies and the way they present them continue to get support. I understand why she gets news coverage and why he gets news coverage, but the support is scary to me.
I absolutely agree with you. How a lot of these proposals are getting support is kind of unimaginable, but political leaders like Mamdani and AOC do have a good knack for, in a sense, inciting class warfare in that way, saying that broad affordability is a big issue for New Yorkers and as well across the country. And it's sometimes easy to just point at, corporations or high earners and say, well, they're not paying their fair share, despite statistics from the IRS, obviously, supporting evidence that high earners actually contribute more to government revenues than other citizens. So the support for these policies is definitely disheartening, and I think there is a need for individuals to know what they're voting for and at least have some foundation of especially the economic implications of policies that they are supporting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Recent news for Mamdani. I'm sure that you're busy pretty much 7 days a week covering him, but the recent, he injected Reagan's famous quote, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you, and used a different quote, something along the lines of, I've worked hard all day and I can't afford to feed my family, was what he was comparing it to. And I was just curious what your thoughts were there, because he's basically saying Reagan's wrong, that the government can help you.
Well, I mean, I'd expect nothing less from a socialist whose entire ideology is based on central planning. Obviously, Reagan's quote of, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, Mamdani would disagree with that because he wants to inject government in all aspects of New York life. So definitely hearing what he said was disheartening, and I obviously think that is just blatantly incorrect. But as we've seen with things like the government grocery stores trying to nationalize, in a sense, an industry or put the government in charge of something as seemingly simple as food supply. And most recently, we saw plans for him to open another government-owned grocery store in the Bronx. He had already put out prior plans of opening one in East Harlem by 2027. So he's definitely committed to at least the government grocery stores as one example of injecting government in daily life.
On the government grocery stores in New York, you wrote a piece called Mamdani's free grocery stores will charge New Yorkers twice over. What do you mean by that?
Well, they're not only going to be charging consumers at the register, because while all of the food in the grocery stores aren't 100% free, but he is dedicated to making them more affordable in a sense, or artificially lowering the price, which has disastrous consequences. But it not only charges consumers at the register, but also, again, in taxes. A huge problem with the government grocery stores is the incentive structure. The public sector has no incentive to be profitable or to use taxpayer dollars prudently, whereas the private sector, who does have that profit incentive, they want to maximize their profits because that's how they make their living. But the public sector doesn't have that same incentive. So as we've seen in places like Baldwin, Florida, or Erie, Kansas, that opened similar government-run grocery stores, the burden to taxpayers was astronomical. They were sinking millions, if not tens of millions of dollars into these stores that just failed. They didn't deliver affordability. They didn't effectively lower prices. They made things more unaffordable because of the burden to taxpayers. And Mamdani has stated that the first store in East Harlem was going to open for $30 million, whereas in the private sector, someone could open a store for $3 to $5 million, and that's on the high end. So we're seeing astronomical price tags associated with these stores. And of course, thanks to the taxpayer, because the government's not putting their own money in, they're using taxpayer dollars. And when you're using other people's money, oftentimes you're not using it prudently.
And what people don't realize is, grocery stores margins are very, very small. I mean, 1% to 2% in terms of profit margins. But Mamdani's business model is not to be profitable. I mean, he clearly says we want to make grocery stores that we don't have to worry about being profitable. How do you even determine what you pay the employees, or does it not matter? I mean, if you're not going to be profitable, why not pay everybody $100 an hour?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, in terms of how much he's paying workers, he's been supporting the idea of the $30 minimum wage broadly. So I wonder if that's how much that he's planning to pay his workers. Again, all financed by the taxpayer. But you're absolutely right. Private grocers only have profit margins of about 1% to 2%. So Mamdani coming in with these government stores are another source of competition for the local markets and bodegas. And that extra competition, especially with the government who is artificially keeping prices low, that sort of puts them at an unfair advantage in the market and might have the potential of driving private stores who are on those thin margins right out of the market when they can't compete with the government.
Yeah, absolutely. So if his goal is affordability, what are the alternative approaches that focus on lowering the barriers and the costs rather than the government running and taking over these industries?
Well, rather than inject the government in New York businesses and in daily life, they can instead not inject themselves. They can deregulate, they can lower taxes, they can make things more affordable for individuals and businesses. So, for example, by deregulating or by lowering taxes, by reducing those barriers to entry, you're lowering the amount that businesses or individuals have to pay for the government. That gives them more money in their own pockets to spend on things that they need. And for businesses specifically, with fewer taxes or regulatory burdens, they can pass those savings on to consumers in the form of lower prices. They can expand their operations, or they can even hire more employees, which would contribute to higher labor participation rates, all of which contribute to broader economic growth. So rather than the idea of central planning and putting the government in charge of a variety of things, whether that's housing or food or injecting the government in the labor market, they need to take a step back and realize that the private sector simply does it better. The private sector is more productive. They have a better handle on the intricacies of running a business or hiring employees or supply chain management, all of those sorts of things. So if you let the private sector do what it does best, that will create the most beneficial outcomes for New Yorkers.
I couldn't agree more. As you talk about Mandami and these policies and sort of the broader implications, what is your advice to entrepreneurs and small business owners in other states that are watching these policy battles happen, and and instead of them thinking that's somewhere else, thank goodness that's not in my backyard. Thank goodness that's not happening here. What is your advice to them to make sure it doesn't happen where they are?
I think that's a great question. What businesses and individuals can definitely do are support politicians that are supporting policies that deregulate, that lower taxes. If they have commitment to free enterprise, that is what creates the best outcomes, not supporting candidates that aim to take control of essentially the government or industry or are implementing regulatory burdens and other tax hurdles, things like that. So like you mentioned, what happens in New York doesn't just impact New Yorkers. It has, especially since New York has Wall Street and is the financial hub of the world, really, it has implications all across America. So supporting policies that deregulate, that lower taxes, that allow businesses in the private sector to thrive are what is going to be helping states across the country.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Well, Nicole Huyer with Heritage Foundation, tell everyone where they can follow you and what you're writing about.
You can follow me on my X account, which is at Nicole Huyer, as well as stay up to date with what I am currently writing about Mamdani, about the labor market, about a variety of domestic economic issues at the heritagefoundation.com under Nicole Huyer.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for joining us. And thank you all for taking the time to tune in to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Bye for now.